Well, good morning, everyone. And can you see me okay? And a very warm welcome to today's Eco Church session. For those who don't know me, I'm Eileen Newington. I'm a member of Beulah URC in Cardiff, and I'm the Green Advocate for the Welsh Synod. I'd like to extend a particular welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time. And I hope you've all had a chance to greet each other in the breakout rooms and introduce yourselves to each other. So this is the third of our Synod of Wales Eco Church online sessions. And the sessions were devised to encourage and enable us as church members who are taking part in the Eco Church programme, and hopefully to give us some fresh ideas and practical tips. They're also importantly an opportunity for people who are involved in the Eco Church scheme to meet and share with our experiences with one another. And as we've said before, the sessions are, everybody is welcome, whether you're just thinking of starting off on Eco Church or whether you've been taking part in it for years. Hopefully there'll be something helpful in these sessions for everyone. So the sessions are normally based around the 5 Eco Church areas, and already we've covered lifestyle and also community and global engagement. And as you know, this morning, we're going to be talking about land, and we're really looking forward to hearing what Rosie and Claire are going to share with us on how churches can use their green spaces to best use. But before I did introduce them, I'd just like to speak to you briefly about our next session. In March, we've decided to leave the Eco Church areas for a moment and concentrate on how we as individuals and churches can engage with our politicians. And we're going to call the session, "And God Said, Do Not Be Silent." This year, ahead of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26, it's vital that faith communities use their voices to call on their politicians and the government for decisive climate action. Now, Hope for the Future is a charity working to bring local politicians and their communities together to take action on the climate. And they offer tailored and ongoing support to constituents, for example, in researching their MPs' positions on the climate, to offering templates and help with correspondence, and also even helping to plan events. So we're really pleased that one of their team, Rachel Mander, is able to join us for that session. And I've heard her speak several times that she's very engaging, very interesting, and I do recommend that you come and have a listen. We're also pleased to have a community artist, Jo Jones, and she's going to come along and inspire us and guide us on how we might be creative in approaching our politicians. Craftivism is an excellent way of catching our MPs' attention and their imagination, and just building up, cementing our personal contact with them. So it would be great if you could join us, and that session is on Thursday, the 25th of March in the evening. But back to this morning now. We're so grateful to have Rosie and Claire with us. Rosie is a member of Barry Uniting Church and works with Cardiff Council Parks Service as their Strategy and Development Manager. And Claire is our newly appointed Synod Property Officer. So after we've heard from Rosie, there'll be a 5-minute tea break, and then we'll hear from Claire, and following that, there'll be a chance for questions. So I hope you enjoy the morning, and now I'd like to hand you over to Rosie and welcome her. Thank you.
So I'm talking to you about the land. It's a little bit bizarre, this, really, because obviously I've been at the last 2 sessions as a sort of participant, and so it's a bit strange not being a participant this time as much. Just a little bit of my background of me. I'm basically trained as a landscape architect on an environmental science and landscape degree way back in the sort of late 70s, early 80s, and I came to Wales, initially working as a landscape architect for Vale of Glamorgan Council, and then moved to Cardiff in 1990. And my sort of background really there started off in very much as a designer, working with sort of public landscape, and as much more in recent years, as Eileen has said, working on strategy and policy in relation to sort of public open space provision, and trying to secure money for sort of big scale parks improvements, and sort of environmental works. So that's my sort of background, and obviously with my other hat on, I'm a member at Barry Uniting Church, and some of you may be aware of our sort of big, very long running project there, where we've been trying to secure a new building and build really from scratch on a new piece of land. So, you know, take care of the land is very much at the forefront of everything we've been trying to do over the last certainly the last 10 years, and for the project really nearly 20 years. So I'm going to talk initially really about this connection that we have with land, and what do green spaces do for us. Certainly as a sort of somebody who works in public parks, it's really important that we understand as professionals why we've got these spaces and what they're doing for people. And this quote about from Dr. Cecil, I can't even pronounce his name, it's actually a quote from the National History Museum up in London. Research clearly shows we need nature in our surroundings. We need trees in our streets, plants in our gardens, flowers on our balconies. We need nature as our neighbour all the time. And we know these things. It's so difficult to actually quantify. And there is a lot of research going on at the moment where people are actually trying to provide sort of proper measures of how these things, how green space impacts on our lives. But we know it improves air quality. It's been quoted that 1 tree is the equivalent of 10 air conditioning systems, reducing the temperature or modulating the temperature, preventing extremes. Green is a colour that soaks up heat, and certainly green spaces are less harsh environments than sort of the hard concrete sort of inner cities that we see, or even sort of very, very wild sort of desert areas where there is no green. Green is something that we sort of aspire to. Green spaces provide shade and shelter. They improve physical and mental health. I mean, William Bird, one of a sort of local GP in the sort of 1990s, did a lot of research into the impact of green space on the cost of the health service, and sort of put some costings to how much you could reduce the cost of poor health and poor mental health if you encouraged more people to actually get out into the open air and exercise. Improving water quality and reducing flooding, well, we all know that one. I mean, one of the things that breaks my heart is actually front gardens being paved over, which discharges water so much more quickly into the system, and you suddenly have flooding problems where you didn't have problems before. So the environment is an incredibly connected thing. Supporting biodiversity, increasing life expectancy, again linked to that health issue, that people who get outside and have a healthy lifestyle, contact with nature in general, are healthier and their life expectancy will be longer. And this whole issue of keeping us in touch with the seasons and the weather, really, really important to us as individuals. I'm not a biblical scholar by any means, but it strikes me the Bible is a book that begins and ends with the garden, as I've perhaps said a couple of times to people. And it's interesting, obviously, there is not a strong sort of urban story in the Bible. It's very much a story of land and nature. The settings of a lot of the things are in the open air, in the environment, and some of the key stories are actually around gardens. The Garden of Eden, for example, as a sort of an allegory or a description of how creation occurred. And the stories that we associate with Jesus, the Garden of Gethsemane, the Easter garden, and then going into Revelation, the garden of with the Holy City. There's this connection that we have in our faith with nature and with gardens and with the open air. And just sort of speeding you through 4,000 years of history of gardens. I mean, if we look at sort of the ancient gardens of Mesopotamia, there are pictures sort of going back 4,000 years of people wanting to work with the land, wanting to create beauty and wanting to make spaces that people can enjoy and take pleasure in. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. You know, a place that we haven't got a clue what it looked like, but there are plenty of representations of what it might have looked like in those times. And then moving through into the gardens of the Muslim world, the courtyard gardens that we see in Northern Africa and Spain. All of these cultures have sort of given us an idea of beauty, really, of beautiful places where nature can be appreciated and really enjoyed. And through our own sort of history of gardening and landscape, gardens in the sort of medieval times, so we associate monks with gardens of herbs and, you know, places where people could cultivate medicinal plants. But there was also a story of gardens as being places of contemplation and beauty, and places that there are sort of devices that we see in sort of medieval gardens of the flowery mead, which is the sort of the idea of being able to sit in a place where you could appreciate wild flowers and see nature. There's even a device that was used in those sort of medieval landscapes of a mount, which you have a little mound in the corner of your garden that you could sit on top of and actually look down on the creation that you had made. And these are all things that we see in sort of ancient gardens, but also sort of have moved forward in more modern ideas of garden design. I mean, the middle picture I've got here is actually Versailles. But some of those places were incredibly contrived. I mean, gardens by the time of the sort of sort of late 17th, early 18th, mid 18th century were places where you could display your fortune and show off, you know, the sort of amazing building that you had. People couldn't perhaps see inside the building, but they could see the setting that you'd created, and you had this beautiful place of contrived beauty, sort of these very, very intricate designs. And that sort of went in this country through into Capability Brown and his much more relaxed ideas of gardening. I mean, obviously the sort of gardens of Versailles and again St. Petersburg and places like that were really high maintenance. You needed a lot of people to look after them. Capability Brown brought in this more natural style, and what we see really almost nowadays is an idealized idea of the countryside. But even then, there were displays of wealth. There was one of the devices that he used to use was putting things like miniature cattle in the background of his garden to make your estate actually look a lot bigger than it actually was. And then the third picture here is Kew. And then we have this idea of gardens being a place where you could learn. And Kew was one of the sort of foremost places where horticulture developed as a science, and it became a place of curiosity. We had the plant collectors, people bringing plants from all over the world back from the farthest corners of the empire to enhance the gardens of this world, but also this country, but also trying to understand more about what horticulture could do, what you could do, how could you breed plants. You have the tulip growers of Holland wanting to sort of create new colours of tulip, people trying to sort of manipulate plants and wildlife to their own devices to make them really their own, really, and demonstrate their wealth and their understanding and their knowledge. So gardens have played a really important part in our sort of culture. But I suppose the biggest sort of change in gardening and in the idea of landscape came in the sort of late 18th, early 19th century with the sort of Industrial Revolution, when the landscape was spoilt incredibly by the sort of advance of industrialization. I mean, these pictures of Coalbrookdale and the sort of picture of Manchester, you can see the pollution that took place. And that's really when the public parks movement, that I'm obviously the sort of tail end of now, really came into being. Initially, it wasn't a sort of public thing. It was actually the philanthropists and the factory owners recognizing that health was the most important thing. This is a little postcard of Peel Park, which was in Bradford, one of the early parks developed by the sort of philanthropists and eventually handed over to the local authority or the local corporation to look after. And in Cardiff, we have our own story of that sort of public landscape. Roath Park was developed in the sort of late 1870s, quite a bit later on from the northern cities. In fact, we do know the councillors from Cardiff went to have a look round the parks up in northern England to see what they could do with their landscapes. And they developed Roath Park. I mean, the picture of Roath Park on the left here is, I think, it's quite an incredible picture. And you have to see that in the context. It's actually dated in 1911, this picture. You have to see it in the context of what the rivers were like on either side there. The Rumney and the Ely and the Taff rivers would have been thick with coal dust. And this in Roath Park was a place where the water was clear because it came down from Caerphilly Mountain. It wasn't polluted, and you had a place where people could actually take the fresh air. They could enjoy the environment. They could enjoy gathering together around the bandstand and all the things that we now associate with the sort of Victorian parks. But the Victorians were also people who were very interested in their landscape, and we have a lovely guidebook from Roath Park from 1905, where it talks about every aspect of the park and how it was all designed and how it was laid out. I mean, those of you who know Cardiff and know Roath Park, you know, will be able to appreciate the park and how it was put together with the botanic gardens. There's a recreational area, there's a botanic area, there's a wild area. Every piece of the park was really important. But there's a section in there about the wildlife, and actually it's quite sad really to read it. And it's a recognition that all this design and everything that humans had done had actually changed the area completely. And there's this description of the wolf and the wild boar have long been extinct. The last pine marten was destroyed in this county within the last 35 years by a man still living. The polecat on the very verge of extinction, and many other species are slowly, surely becoming less numerate. It becomes necessary to record about the life history of the interesting creatures before they become utterly lost to us. So there's a recognition that even in a very short space of time, people within living memory could remember in 1905 pine martens being in the Cardiff area, and that's that's unimaginable to us now. I mean, that's a creature of the Scottish sort of fringes of the Highlands. So I think there's a recognition that we had done so much destruction to the land. So I'm going to leave that thought with you, because obviously the parks changed and became places of recreation, and they became the places that we value today within our cities. But there are other spaces within our urban areas that are really important. And this is a picture that I associate really strongly with. This is Harrow in London, where I grew up, and this is the little street on the left-hand side where I used to walk to school every day, and I probably saw that view every day. It hadn't changed much in the sort of couple of hundred years since that engraving had been done. The church on the top of the hill surrounded by trees, and it's that picture of the churchyard and those ancient places of Britain, these older buildings that we have in every community, surrounded by a piece of land that probably remains sort of undisturbed for the best part of, in many cases, 1,000 years. And those are places of nature and wildlife and all sorts of beauty, ancient trees, lichens on the stones, old stones. There's that whole sort of history and association with the land that I think maybe we sort of lost in the 19th century, because we suddenly it's almost like we became very building focused, that our worship and everything became focused on trying to get people into a building, and we lost sight of that setting. Obviously, municipal burial really had a big impact on that. But, I think we have to sort of perhaps learn to value those ancient places and those older gardens and those older landscapes which have remained unchanged. So I'm going to sort of jump from there really to a story much more associated with today, and where our church in Barry Uniting Church had gone and sort of share with you something about what we've done, and hopefully perhaps open eyes to where we can perhaps return our thoughts back to those sort of ancient gardens and those places of nature and places of enjoyment that can be at the heart of every community. Barry Uniting Church is the production of two churches, or the joining of two churches, Porthcurry Road Methodist Church on the left-hand side, and Windsor Road United Reformed Church on the right-hand side, who have sat opposite each other on Windsor Road / Porthcurry Road for the past 100 years plus. The congregations tried to join in the 1960s, and there was a big tussle really over which buildings should be kept and which buildings should be, sold off and redeveloped. And in the end, it didn't actually happen. I arrived in the church in 1984, and a similar thing happened again in the mid-1980s. Each time it was the opposite building that we'd chosen to stay in, and each time the congregation turned the idea down. So there was quite a disillusioned period at the end of the sort of 1990s, and Porthcurry Road on the right-hand side left with a building with a listed facade, very, very poor building, no land to speak of, as you can see from the railings on the front, on a very steep hill. Those of you who know Windsor Road United Reformed Church will know it has exactly the same issues on the opposite side of the road, just a little bit lower down the hill. And in the early 2000s, we were made aware of the new development at the waterfront in Barry, where the docks were being created into a new waterfront community. And as part of the planning process, a piece of land was allocated as a church and community centre, specifically a church and community centre, not a building that could be used for the community. It was actually offered to local churches in Barry, whoever wanted to pick up the challenge to take on that piece of land. And at the time, Porthcurry Road Methodist Church, we were thinking of doing something with our building. And we thought, well, there's our church, there's United Reformed Church across the road, there's a Anglican church at the top of the hill, and there's a Baptist church right next to that as well. So that's 4 churches within a space of a few hundred yards of each other. Maybe this is the time that we take on the challenge. So we took that challenge on, and we were shortly joined by the Windsor Road Church. And we spent sort of 10 years working on a project to try and get a really nice, huge building on this piece of land, which just fell flat on its face. Money problems. We had an idea of a building that we wanted. Everything was going to be building focused. And actually, at the end of the sort of 2010-11, we got to the point where we were thinking, we just don't know what we're going to do with this. And we can recall having a big meeting in the church when we just threw around lots of ideas, and we were thinking about, what can we do? Could we put a tent down there or something? Could we start something on the building? And in the end, we came up with the idea of a garden. In actual fact, it was letting go of the building that pushed the project forwards, and we were offered the opportunity of applying for some money for a community grant for creating a community garden down at the waterfront. So the middle picture shows our little piece of land, very unprepossessing, very soggy, right next to the railway, in between the doctor's surgery and the big retail park. That we had a big piece of land. This is actually the top third, the third furthest away from the footpath, because we thought, well, if we're going to do anything, we've got to do it on a piece of land that we can't disturb in the future. So we'll leave the lower 2/3 for our main building when and if we ever get there. And so began our journey of really working with nature. These pictures here are from March 2013, when we started work on the garden, and this is real physical work. This was yellow jackets, as you can see, litter pickers, loppers. We didn't have any facilities down there, so we had a caravan with somebody stationed in there making coffee and teas, obviously a flush toilet in the caravan for anybody who dared wanting to need it. And we just basically spent a day down there on the 23rd of March, clearing the space to see if we could actually do something with it. And I can tell you, having been there on that first day, it was the most exposed I've ever felt as a church member. It was liberating and terrifying at the same time, being in public view, people walking past saying, what are those people doing over there? And actually, people were asking us, what are you doing? What are you building? And we were saying, we're building a church. We're building a garden, and the plan is to build a church. And it was a huge sort of leap, really, to come out of, it was almost like coming out of cover and coming into view, really. And this is sort of some pictures from later on in that spring. Our group of young people, we had a big pile of soil delivered. And oh, sorry, there we are. Had a big pile of soil delivered. We bought some raised beds that you can see on the right hand side. And the job was to get the soil into the raised beds. So we had a bit of a chain gang going. Went on for, say, 2 or 3 weeks, if and more, filling our soil into our beds, planting seeds, putting up bird feeders very early on. We had a piece of tree cover all the way down the side between the land and the building and the retail park, which had to be kept as part of the planning condition. And it was a fantastic place for birds. We put the bird feeders up just thinking, oh, I wonder what we'll get. I can remember taking a picture of the first bird we saw landing there. I mean, completely out of scale to the number of birds we've actually seen there over the years. We've seen masses of birds. And we encouraged them with lots of feeders in that location. We didn't really know what we were doing. We just thought, well, we'll grow some vegetables in the garden. Somebody gave us some lettuce seedlings, which you can see being planted up here. And on the left-hand side, you can see what happened the first year. That was our first amazing harvest. Big cabbages and lettuces that actually looked like cabbages and lettuces. You know, we were really impressed with what we managed to create. And in the middle, you can see what that piece of land looked like by the summer of 2013. That was literally 4 months' work. And it was just incredible. Well, actually, no, it's a little bit later on because there's but it was very similar to that in 2014. That's taken from the building, so it's probably a year later. But it was very similar to that in the first year. And on the right-hand side, we had a temporary building that we managed to purchase, get the planning consent for, and put into the land by September 2013. And this is our first Harvest Festival service in the building, where we had a little open air service. We couldn't actually use the building at that point because we didn't have any services fixed in the building. So we had to just sort of use a battery powered keyboard, and we had somebody talking there, and people came for a little harvest festival and sat on the edge of the planters and brought deck chairs just to enjoy being together in that space. Well, we've since then gone from strength to strength. We have a regular sort of monthly garden session in the building. Obviously, we did get our services connected, so the building was eventually being used for services by the following January. So that would be January 2014. These are some pictures of the sort of things that we've done over the years. I mean, cutting back vegetation, growing vegetables. We have a sort of regular little sales of vegetables in church. Our regular sessions, or we have flowers there which we use inside the church. We don't not buy flowers, but we do use the flowers from the garden. Litter picking in the surrounding area, and some of the stuff that was dumped on the piece of land that we owned below the church. Well, it's quite incredible what we actually find down there. But it's also a space for nature, and I think, you know, we've watched this garden grow from nothing, and we've seen what has come in, and you know, the wildflowers and the wildlife that we've seen there. We built a wildlife pond, which immediately we built it, we had frogs in it and frog spawn. Actually, I remember somebody bringing some frog spawn which we tipped in, and they brought it actually in a box of it was a cake box, one of these little round boxes where you have little mini Swiss rolls, and they left it quite near to the food bank pile in church, so we did have to move that quite quickly because we thought that might be a bit awkward, because it was actually full of frog spawn. But we put frog spawn in the pond, but we then found we had our own frogs there anyway. The second picture along is they are 6-spot burnet moths, which we found we had a massive population of in the area on the wildflowers that were growing. So we've left a lot of wildflowers there. We've mown sections and we've kept sections of wildflowers. I think one of the most amazing services we ever had in the church was when, after the service, one of the young people came running out and said, "Come and watch this." And we realised that the moths had actually laid their chrysalises under the little wooden balcony outside the church. And we stood there and watched these little moths hatch out of their chrysalises, which was just the most incredible experience. This is another, the third one along is a hedgerow that we planted. Again, plants free from one of the wildlife organisations offering free plants for planting each autumn. And the bees, we've got lots of bees. These are cowslips, the final picture there. It's interesting the difference between wild ones and cultivated ones. This is actually a cultivated one, attracts the bees just as much, but it flowers at a completely different time to the wild cowslips that we've also got there. If it wasn't for the fact that we were in lockdown and I was sitting here, today would be the day we do our annual Big Garden Birdwatch coffee morning. One of the delights of having our temporary building is the fact that we can see out into the land. I think lots of people, I don't know how many people actually come to church just to watch the birds, but you can see the birds, you can see everything that's going on in the garden while the services are going on. And on a Saturday, the last Saturday in January, we will have an hour's bird watch there, and we'll do the count and we submit it every year. The last picture is Holly the cat, who's a regular visitor to the garden, who we do have to scare away while we're doing the bird watch, but we have, you know, lots and lots of wildlife visitors there, masses and masses of sparrows, almost too many to count on our bird watch. And this is a picture of the garden in its sort of, you know, semi-maturity, and you can see beyond the piece of land that we are now moving towards, well, actually more than moving towards. I put this in, actually, it's just a little prayer that was used about the building, and it's the building and the garden are a sort of celebration of, you know, what we have achieved there, but how our community as a church has drawn together and how the garden has pushed our community outwards. We're no longer building centric, I think, even with the new building. In fact, trying to actually get the new building installed, a lot of people said, well, can't we just stay here in the temporary building? It's lovely. Well, no, we can't, because it's only got temporary planning consent, and also the land is very flooded and it's quite hard. You have to paddle into church sometimes. But, you know, it's been a place of blessing for so many. But this is our new plans, the bridge between our new building on the piece of land below, beyond the garden, moving towards the community. One of the challenges that we've had with that new building, and again, because of the community we've built up around the garden, was moving slowworms from our land into our garden area. We had to put barriers around the development land. And last summer 2019, for 10 weeks, I think it was, we did the Great Slowworm Challenge, where we had 2 visits a day, morning and afternoon, translocating slowworms from the building site into the garden. With people visiting the site from our church community, bringing in people from outside as well, because so many people were interested in getting involved. And we've all got very familiar with the habits of slowworms, and we definitely have a lower slug population in the garden because of it. And this is where we are now, really, our building half built. The garden is still yet to be built. We're obviously not worshipping in our building at the moment, but the garden is still there, and an eye is being kept on it. So that's our sort of journey, really, from 2 very, very traditional, very building-centred buildings to a building which we hope is much more outward-looking and more land-centred. And so, just to sort of finish off with, really, just some thoughts to pass on. I mean, some of the things we've learned: work with what you have and who you have. You know, start where you are. It seems a bit stupid to say it, really, but we're often start with a dream, which is what we started with before. We started with the idea of a big building, but actually we needed to start where we were to get to where we wanted to get to. Observe and record as much as you can. Find out where you are. I always say to people who move into new gardens, don't do anything for at least a year. See what you have before you try doing anything and changing anything. Get outside your building. That was the best thing we ever did. We get muddy. We enjoy running around. Children jump in puddles. We have all sorts of things going on, and it's exciting. Look for opportunities, not problems. We certainly had a lot of problems, but you have to really turn those problems into your opportunities. And for 10 years, we missed the opportunity of the land. It was only when we saw that as the opportunity that we really got somewhere. Work with nature and don't be fixed in ideas. Be very flexible with what you do. And basically have fun. I mean, this has brought us out of a church where we went in with pews and what I call pew fences. You couldn't get from one side of the church to the other without walking all the way around, to a church where everybody knows everybody. And I think we are outward looking in a way that we never have been. The land has changed us. And I'm just going to leave you with the phrase that this was actually used as the Bible verse when we had our first harvest festival. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land and will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail.
Super, great. Well, yes, my name's Claire. I just want to say a big thank you to Rosie for that wonderful presentation. That was just brilliant, fantastic. So thank you so much, Rosie, for all that you shared there and given us to think about. I'm just going to introduce myself briefly. So I'm Claire Boot. I'm the new property officer for the Synod. So Sue Cole retired towards the end of last year. And I used to work as meeting support for the Synod office. So some of you might recognise my face from Synod meetings from typing away during the minutes. And so I worked alongside Sue doing other admin tasks as well, which has been really helpful for me now taking on the property officer role. I think I had a slide about that, I did. And the main thing is to say, here to help. So please do get in touch. I'll put my contact details up at the end. If there's anything that I can help with, give any advice or support about, then do please just give me a shout. So as well as being property officer, I've got a bit of background with Eco Church. So I used to be the administrator for this church in London. And whilst I was there, we got the Bronze Award for Eco Church. So we know all about filling in that questionnaire and ticking the boxes and talking to people about making the changes that you need. You might notice the picture here. This church has got solar panels on it. It's a listed building with solar panels on the roof, which is quite a thing. That's more than this seminar can discuss, but just shows you the different ways that churches can pursue going green. But as well as working with Eco Church in that, I was also a volunteer for Arosha. That's the organisation that runs Eco Church, and they've got a number of urban nature reserves. And this is me dressed as a bee during a family open day, reading a story about a bee. So as you can see, I've got professional and personal interest and experience in going green and encouraging other people to go green. So what I just wanted to do this morning was just give some pointers really about how you might go about using your land for the benefits of wildlife. So first thing is, survey the land. What have you got? As Rosie said, observing and recording is a brilliant thing to do. If you can do that over the process of the year and see what you've got through the seasons, that's brilliant. But basically just get a plan together, map out what you've got. Which way does the sun come up? Where's the prevailing wind? Have you got any water on the land? What plants have you already got? If you can pull in anyone, any local wildlife trusts, any experts that you know to come and give you a hand. If not, just grab a handbook and see what you can identify with trees and shrubs and plants. Look at what you've got for wildlife as well, but also see how people use your land. It might be that your church is on a spot where everybody cuts through to get to the post office, or maybe you've got a low wall that people always sit on when they're waiting for the bus. So make a note, include in your plan not just the wildlife that you've already got in the land around your church, but the way that people currently use it, if they do. Then one next thing is have a look at your local area as well. So not just what you've got in the church, but what's immediately around you. Who's next door? Are you surrounded by private gardens? Are you next to the local park? Is there a river or a canal nearby? Perhaps your church is the only remotely green space in a very built-up urban area. It's important for wildlife as a stopping point in a sea of grey concrete. Maybe one of your neighbours has got a beehive, and you can see about whether you can do something with that. Perhaps your area is known for a rare sort of orchid that you actually have growing in your land. Just find out what's around you as well as what you've got, and how what you have connects with that, and just what those possibilities are. So once you've got that, explore your options, think about what you'd like to do. So A Rocha through Eco Church, you've got lots of ideas about that, and there's a great organisation called Caring for God's Acre, and although they are specifically thinking about graveyards, a lot of what their material has is relatable to any land for a church. It's full of lots of good advice, so have a look at what they say. You can also just Google things like wildlife gardening, and there's some great resources from the National Trust. There's also RSPB as well, will give advice about what would be good for bird life where you are. But it's interesting how the ideas don't always need lots of money. So when it comes to wildlife, being less tidy can be a very good start. So if you've got a patch of grass at the moment, and perhaps during the summer you mow it every week, well, if you mowed it just once a month, you would allow plants to grow that are good for wildlife. You'd allow clover and buttercups and dandelions, which are really good for birds and insects to grow. Perhaps you've got a patch of nettles in the corner somewhere, which every year you try and thrash back and keep down. Well, if you let the nettles grow, that's really good for butterflies. So you can be thinking about, bird boxes and bug hotels, and making little holes in your fences for hedgehogs to pass through, but also just thinking about being just less tidy. What are the options around that as well, at the same time, of course, whilst maintaining your buildings and access to it well. The slide here has got ivy in the backdrop, and that's an interesting one because as your property officer, I can't condone allowing ivy to grow all over the buildings and the walls and everything, because that's not going to be good for the building. But ivy is really good for bird life and insects. It's habitat, it's a food supply. So is there a way that, we need to keep the ivy off some bits, but can the ivy be allowed to grow somewhere else? What are the options there? What sort of balancing acts can you do with that? So once you've thought about all those different ideas and pulled together what you might like to do, what the possibilities are, then communicate with people. Of course, people in church, so that they know what the ideas are, get their feedback on what you might be thinking about and the reasons why, how this connects with who you are as a church and how you connect with your local community. But also, how do you communicate with the people outside the church? So as we're saying, if you've got some sort of land that has got a footpath through it that people often use, perhaps people, often when they're walking their dogs go through, then how do you communicate with those people who have an interest as well, or even just the people who will see it? Especially if you're going to go down the line of being less tidy about things, say you do mow the lawn less often and it looks overgrown. Well, how are you going to reassure people that you're not neglecting the church, that you haven't forgotten to do the mowing or to hack back the brambles, that actually it's intentional, you've decided to leave that pile of leaves and sticks in the corner? It's good habitat for hedgehogs over the winter. How are you going to communicate with other people? And also that way you can draw on support too. I think, as Rosie said, in that first raised bed, they were given a load of lettuce seedlings, and gardeners, I know, often have lots of spare plants, and there could be times of the year when everyone's trying to get rid of their strawberries that have just gone mad everywhere. So by connecting with people inside and outside the church, perhaps you're going to find sources of support, or if you want to get involved or are able, willing to help with things or donate spare things that they may have. Maybe you need tools, maybe people can offer spare ones of those. And then once you've done all that, worked out what you might like to do, talked it all through, got a plan, then get on and do it, put it into practice, give it a start, try it out, see what happens. Now, I haven't got a whole screen about funding here because I want to make sure that people are inspired to think about what you want to do first. As Rosie says, get the dream going first from where you are. Don't try and plan what you're going to do according to what the funding might be. It's very difficult to work backwards. They will fund so-and-so, and so that's what we're going to do. It's much better to start off with, this is what we've got, this is what we'd love to do, and build from there. So don't let money be the main thing. Also, it's possible to get started and to get doing things without loads of money. So there could be simple things that you can do that might even save you money in some ways if you're not having to be quite, you know, mowing the grass every 10 minutes. That might be a benefit, but there'll be small things that you can get going and get started with sooner rather than later, which will, you know, give you momentum for anything you might want to do further. But it also means that whilst you're doing the funding applications, which can take time, you can still see progress and you know you're doing something. And if a particular application doesn't come off, because even when you've got a really good project, we all know how difficult it can be to get funding. It's very competitive. You won't be disheartened. The whole project won't lose momentum if you've already started doing something, if there's already some changes underway. You can see that you're using the land in certain ways, and it means that, yeah, you won't lose your oomph if you're waiting for the funding to come in, and it won't be a case of, well, we tried it and it didn't work, so there's no point doing this greening thing. So I'd really encourage you to just see what you can do from where you are with your own resources and build funding into that, but not make it the main thing. There are sources of funding about. A lot of stuff has been sort of reallocated towards COVID-19 responses at the moment. So I think, particularly once this year's out of the way, more things will come available for funding environmental work and anything to do with the climate. Keep your eye on Keep Wales Tidy. I know St John's Buckley up in North Wales have benefited from a starter garden kit for them. They're not running something at the moment, but if you go on the Keep Wales Tidy website, you can sign up for their newsletter. And so when they are offering funding and materials again, you can get on board with that. The landfill disposals tax is another interesting one. So companies with landfill sites or any sort of waste disposal sites put money into a big pot to help the local environment within 5 miles of those sites. So WCVA, which is the Welsh Commission for Voluntary Action, I think, WCVA, on their website, they've got information about this landfill disposals tax fund. The deadline for that sadly passed about 10 days ago, but they will run it again. And again, you can get onto their mailing list and find out when they're next running funding for that. Also, check out any shops nearby. Tesco, Asda, the Co-op, and now Greggs have sort of funding for community projects. So find out who's near you and what they might fund and what you can get in touch with. There might be other local funds that you know about that you'd be able to access. And also have a look at the Mission Development Fund on the Synod website. So you can find that if you click on resources on the home page, on the menu at the top, go to resources, then funding, and you'll find the Mission Development Fund, because that will fund projects that meet one of 5 mission criteria, one of which is sustaining the environment. So have a look at that as well, as you're just looking at what it is you want to do and how you might be able to do it. And once you've got started and whatever it is, whatever step you want to take, the next thing after that is to survey again afterwards. What's happened now? What's happened since? Whether this is 3 months, 6 months, a year later, take records of it. As we saw with Rosie's presentation, the photographs are brilliant for showing that before and after and helping you to see what's changed and to be inspired for future change. Things like doing the counting for birds, same for insects, anything like that, to show how things have moved forward, to see that if you have attained what you wanted to do. Again, from a funding point of view, all that's very useful for material, for showing funders almost like a pilot project, what you've already done and how you want to move forward from there, as well as for yourselves to see how far you've got, and then as a staging post for your next plans for where you might want to go next from there.
Thank you, Claire. That was really interesting, and also thank you to Rosie. I think we have had two really excellent presentations today, which hopefully have got you brimming with questions. And so we're going to have a short time, it's about 20 minutes, just to ask some questions of Claire and of Rosie. So if you have a question, either put your hand up in the participants list, the blue hand, or put it up on your virtual screen as Jason showed you earlier. So if anybody has a question, please do it. Oh. I've got Janet Nielsen up with your hand up. I don't know if you've got a question or just got your hand up. You haven't taken your hand down. Catherine's got a question. Catherine.
Not so much a question as being a minister who has two churches that are graveyards. One of which is no longer a used graveyard, if you see what I mean. We've still got the stones, some of which have been laid flat, but one which is still used and is also used for burying ashes. There are, just to say that there are a lot of regulations regarding graves, which are something I've actually had to learn quite a lot over the last couple of years. And one of the essential things is making sure that they are safe. We've had to have some graves laid flat in St. John's because they wobble. So just a warning. We found that one of the local masons, the ones that come put up the stones in the first place, they've been very helpful at coming around and doing the survey and doing the topple test, and also been quite generous in how they attend to graves, because you can't always get in touch with families anymore. But there are all sorts of things you can do with that to get the community involved, if you let them know what's going on, because you can also get them to think about their own family histories. And lots of graveyards have got all sorts of little stories if you go around and read them. We've got a whole selection of graves of infants which tell their own story. But it's another way of getting the community involved and interested in what you're doing, and to maybe think about getting back involved in their family history and helping with creating a better final resting place for them.
Thank you, Catherine. That's quite useful for many of our churches. Bev Lynn has put a question in the chat which says, we've got lots of brambles which have taken over a large area. Any ideas on how to remove them so that we can use the space for wildlife? Or maybe we should be removing them all, I don't know. Over to, I don't know, but who wants to answer that question? Claire or Rosie?
I can take that one, actually. I mean, brambles is a real... we have to be quite careful with brambles, because obviously they're a big bird nesting site. You know, there's areas where birds nest. So if you're going to remove brambles, you can't do that within bird nesting season. So that would be depending on the sort of weather, really. You have to watch the birds, see what they're doing. Usually sort of at least mid to end of February through till end of August. You really don't want to touch them. I mean, bramble removal is something that people can do physically. I mean, it's basically just, a lot of it could be done just by a group of willing volunteers, and that doesn't have to be your own congregation, although actually if you can get your congregation to help you, it's a great place to actually get talking to people who you might not have talked to before, and also get family members involved. But there are other organisations, the probation service and other sort of organisations, who will possibly come in and help you to do it. So, but I would say do it physically if you can, because it's the best way to do it, really. And then once you've got the brambles down, you can then either use a sort of, do a strim maybe or something regularly to try and keep them down. They're hard work, but I think the best way to do it is to do it through a wildlife trust, through volunteers, or through your own congregation.
Thanks. And also somebody put something in the chat about wildlife trust. So, anybody else got any questions? Oh my goodness me, we don't have any questions. Alison McCool.
Thank you. Oh, I think this question is maybe for you, Rosie, with your hat on as working as part of the council. I was just thinking, have you got any ideas or any information about the councils in general? Do you find that, are the councils, like I'm in the Vale as you live, and then there's kind of, are the councils more aware of the need to, let verges grow a bit wild and, allow, I know quite often they plant beautiful wildflower beds and things. It would be just nice to know if generally the mentality among our councils is is more sort of working towards biodiversity and so on?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, definitely that there's, it's an interesting one, this. I mean, I was trained in the sort of late 70s, early 80s, as I said right at the start, doing landscape design. And I think one of the things was instilled into us was, you know, don't have anything to do with parks departments because they haven't got a clue about wildlife. And there are very sort of diverse opinions about how to sort of, you know, the sort of horticultural training will be much more sort of manicured and everything, but attitudes are changing. I have to say that parks departments, the culture can take a while to change, but there are definitely changes in attitudes. Certainly things like, you know, the sort of what is it, the BRED? I can't remember what that stands for now, but there's a duty on local authorities to take biodiversity and wildlife into account. You know, so that there are sort of moves in the sort of legislative side, which are encouraging councils to go that view. And I think also there is a huge sort of move within local authorities. There are a lot of people who are supportive of that view. There are a lot of dialogue going on, I can assure you, having been party to an awful lot of dialogue on this subject in local authorities. You know, and I think the movement is in the right direction. But, you know, at the same time, we can't just let everything go. I mean, there are reasons why certain things have to be cut on verges, for example, such as vision splays and things like that. But, you know, the movement is in the right direction. I can really speak from Cardiff's point of view that we have our sort of local wildlife partnership now set up, and there are moves through putting in pollinators, making sure that, you know, wildlife verges are encouraged, and, you know, that there's a lot of education in inverted commas going on amongst some of the sort of people who sort of work for the authority. The problem is mistakes do happen. This is the issue. One person's wildflower patch is somebody else's pile of weeds. So, you know, and occasionally you'll get a rogue mower going in and sort of taking things out. And it's not anything that has been dictated by the authority. It just happens occasionally. But yeah, I think the movement is in the right direction. It's slow progress, but, you know, we're not all sort of Philistines.
I suppose as individuals, when we have our meeting next month, we'll maybe be able to think of ways in which we can have a bit of influence. You know, maybe writing letters or so on. You know, definitely. And obviously we can do our own thing in our own gardens and so on as well.
Absolutely. Yes. First thing, don't pave over your front garden if you can help it, and keep some wild areas.
Thank you.
Had their hand up as well. So Alison.
Yes, very confusing. You've got so many Alison. I think there are at least 3 of us here. First of all, I want to say thank you very, very much for the presentations. Both of them have been really helpful, very interesting, very informative. For us at Canton Uniting Church in Cardiff, we're in a position where we have a small patch that we have used as a community garden with 6 raised beds, and we've grown vegetables and flowers. But we're now in a position where we're thinking about knocking down the church in order to create a bigger community garden. And it's really timely to be able to have this expertise and information to help us as we're thinking about how we organise the garden. My question is, are there any community networks, community garden networks that we can tap into so that there are other people in a similar position who maybe we can share ideas with or get some expertise from?
There's the Federation of City Farms and Gardens is the one of the, I don't think they're called that anymore actually. I can find the details out, but there is a sort of nationwide sort of body in Wales which does support community gardens. In Cardiff, there's a campaign called Food Cardiff. So I mean I'm involved in that because one of my jobs, which is bit of my role, which I didn't mention, is I manage the allotment service as well. So I manage the allotments officer. So, you know, we have an areas of sort of gardening and obviously through the allotment service, but also there are other gardens in Cardiff who, you know, who sort of do that sort of thing on land owned by themselves or owned by others. So, yeah.
Okay, lovely.
There's also Incredible Edible, which is an organisation that's looking to sort of get food in all sorts of interesting places. So yeah, have a look at them as well. I don't know how active they are in Cardiff or Wales, but yeah, Incredible Edible. I'll stick it in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Going on in the chat as well, so keep an eye on the chat. We had Mike from Micron. He was asked to stand up, actually.
Thank you. Just going back to the road verges, there's a charity called Plant Life, which I'm a member of. They've got a very active campaign to persuade councils to leave road verges uncut for a greater part of the year. So I'd encourage you to look at Plant Life on Google. Other search engines are available, of course, and have a look at what they say about that. But my real question was the two presentations were fabulous. Lots to think of about there, but they're both I found them both sort of geared towards urban settings. We are very much a rural church surrounded by farmland. What sort of tips do you have for us in rural areas?
From my point of view, I would say obviously the sort of the fruit and veg growing is not quite so important, but certainly the biodiversity side, you know, would be relevant whether you're in an urban or a rural setting, really. I mean, a lot of farmland doesn't have particularly good biodiversity. So I think it's a case of working to where you are. I mean, where we are in Barry Waterfront is a church with no soil, basically. There's no soil on the land. We're starting from literally nothing and trying to build up, but not going overboard to try and say we want everything. You know, we're trying to literally work where we are, and we're also in an area with very little open space. There's no other sort of public areas in that setting, but where you are in a rural area, there are going to be things that will impact on the landscape there. I mean, it's about making yourself aware of things that are happening in the locality and trying to sort of see where you can plug into that and make a difference. You know, looking at the wildlife, looking at the biodiversity of your area. I mean, trees are the big thing. I would say a big plea actually on the part of for tree planting. I'm actually involved in a really big tree planting project in Cardiff, which is that if you are wanting to do tree planting, don't naturally assume that if you can get free trees from somewhere that the council will have somewhere they can put them, because the most important thing is that the trees are put in the right place. So, you know, it's about getting your idea first about where you want them to go. And if you can put trees on your land, that is great, because we want trees to be looked after. We don't want just to be able to see we've planted 1 million trees. We want to be able to say we've still got 1 million trees in 25 years' time. So, you know, there's a fantastic article just been put up on the BBC News website about scientists all over the world saying there are 10 principles to tree planting. You know, and this is what you need to be thinking about. So I'd say have a look at that and sort of engage with that. But as I say, we are launching a big tree planting campaign. Trees are a really big thing, I would say, and obviously wildflowers and again knowing what you've got in your patch and in your locality.
That's really helpful. We had a hand up for a while.
Yeah, I just want to pick up two things very quickly. One is about dealing with local councils, which is undoubtedly really important because they're responsible for so much of the land in different ways. And we just need to join up the dots. The local councillors we have in our ward are absolutely obsessed with getting parking restrictions on the roads around us. And the consequence of that is, of course, that our neighbours are all thinking of doing what Rosie's rightly saying we shouldn't do, which is concreting over their front gardens, so they then don't have to pay for a parking permit, but they will be able to park their cars on their front gardens. We did send in a response to the consultation pointing that out, that it went against the council's biodiversity policy. We will see, but it's well worth engaging with your local councils, not just about the environment directly, but about other things that they're advocating, which will have a knock-on. And we're actually quite worried. There's lots of lovely front gardens around us, and we're really worried they're all going to disappear because of this parking scheme. And the second point, which in a way is related, is this year, partly because of lockdown, we decided not to mow our lawn as vigorously and left some of it to grow, and some of it we mowed once a month, as Claire was suggesting. And we've been absolutely gobsmacked by the increase in wildlife. Just in 1 year, we haven't done anything else different. Just in 1 year. Butterflies, which we'd not seen before, hedgehogs, which we've not had before, and far more birds. We did have birds before, but far more. And obviously all of that is mainly because of insects attracted by the what's growing in the lawn, which we'd previously been cutting down. And so I would encourage people and churches to do that. I mean, it's less work. It's a complete win-win. It costs absolutely nothing. And during lockdown, it made our gardens so much more enjoyable to be in, as we had to be, of course.
Can I just add something on the lawn thing, which is some people really object strongly to seeing grass that isn't mowed, and the way to make it look as if it's meant to be not mowed is actually just to mow the strip along the edge of the path, and it immediately looks as if it's meant to be. So it's trying to devise ways of actually making it look as if you've made a decision to do it. So
yeah, there is just a bit of a challenge there, because of course if it's a small church garden, you also want space for the children, well, and adults, to run around and play games, and for it to be used for worship and all these sorts of things which do require access. So I absolutely agree with the principle of it, but you just need to have some balance, maybe where there's a multi-use kind of thing going on.
Great, thanks. That's some really good tips. Neil Kirkham put into the chat about any ideas of what to do with a small area that's totally shaded by the church, apart from knocking the building down. So any ideas for shaded gardens?
Well, it's a case of really doing your research and looking at what you've got there, what is actually growing. I mean, things that grow well in shade would be ferns, and there are some lovely sort of winter flowering plants which will grow in shade. Certainly birds, putting your bird feeders up and things like that. It's a case of doing your research and looking to see what you can actually encourage into that area. Don't be obsessed with trying to make it look like a garden just like everybody else's. Plough your own furrow.
I remember pesticides, no pesticides. Mark Rogers, he messaged me to say he wanted to put his hand up. So, Mark.
Sorry, I've only got clap and thumbs up, so I couldn't find the raised hand function. I have to apologise. Rosie, the project looked and sounded wonderful. Was there anything put in place to measure the impact that the project had ecologically? And more importantly, perhaps, was there anything noticeable about the difference it's made to church life, the relationships that go on, the worship, and perhaps the mission?
Certainly, in terms of the sort of ecological measurements, I mean, we do our own sort of observational stuff there. We look at, we're constantly looking there. When we're in the garden, people are recording what they see. We've done no formal ecological. We've had an ecological survey done on the new land, so we do know what things are in the area prior to the building construction, and obviously that's what alerted us to the slow worms. But you know, people take photographs, people post stuff up. We've got a Facebook page, you know, people are recording. In fact, this summer, for the first time, I'm sure Judy would be delighted that not only have we got frogs, which I know she hates, and we've also got newts in our pond now as well. So we've got more slimy little creatures for you to, for you to dislike. But there's lots of, you know, the bird life. We do our regular bird watch, and we've seen different things every year. So yeah, we've definitely got that. In terms of the church life, well, we're a different congregation. That's all I can say. You know, we are not the same people who walked out into that garden 7 years ago. You know, we walked out there as sort of quite terrified. Some of us definitely Methodist, some of us, you know, sort of definitely URC, and it's completely changed us as a congregation. So, you know, I can't really describe it. You know, we've got groups using our building at the moment. We've got very limited use, but I mean, they come along, we just let people pick vegetables if they want to in the garden, and, you know, we sell the vegetables in church for a contribution. We buy bird seed with it, you know, it's really good.
Thank you so much to both Claire and Rosie for we've packed with information tonight today. And I can attest to the work at Barry. It really has brought a whole intergenerational feel to the congregation, because everybody gets involved, everybody. So, you know, it's part of an intergenerational aspect of church life that really has done. I'm going to hand over to Jason.
Well, thanks again. Thanks from me and on behalf of everyone to Claire and Rosie. Very thought-provoking, inspirational, and we've all got little bits of land, even if it's a plant pot. Thanks to Eileen and Judy and to our facilitators. Continue to share and to care, and we're just going to take a deep breath.
Before we finish, Jason, can I just give a little plug? Some of you, well, all of us here today are here because we're concerned about the ecological life and impact of our churches. And just a reminder to everybody that the what's the name of the policy? The eco policy, anyway, I'll call it that for now. It was introduced to the Synod meeting in October, and it will be coming back to the Synod meeting in at the beginning of March, on the 6th of March. And we'd like church reps to support that as an indicator of our commitment to tackling climate change. And if you're aware of who your representative to the Synod meeting is from your church, please can you tell them that you're supportive of having an eco policy. And if you need to find out more about it, you can get to it through the Synod website. And we like people to engage with that before the meeting and at the meeting. So just to say that, Jason, thanks very much indeed.
He's the moderator, he can do what he likes. Just to plug, also next time, remember, news will be going out. If you want to send me an email to sign up, you can do, and I'll be pleased to receive that. So let's just take a deep breath and reflect on what we've heard, and what we've thought, what we've felt. Let's listen for the word of God. Hear the word of the Lord, O people of Israel. For the Lord has an indictment against the inhabitants of the land. There's no faithfulness or steadfast love, no knowledge of God in the land. Swearing, lying, murdering, stealing, adultery are rife. Bloodshed follows bloodshed. Therefore, the land mourns, and all that lives in it languishes, and the birds of the air and even the fish of the sea are perishing. got a letter to read to you. Dear human beings, looking back now, I remember clean running waters, springs, waterfalls, oceans full of life and life-giving rivers, and still waters to sit by. I remember plants of every kind, full of fruit and seeds and goodness. I remember the dodo, the laughing owl, the black-backed bittern, and 100 other birds that are no more. I remember the Zanzibar leopard, the golden toad, and the Pyrenean ibex. If you've forgotten, that's the one you tried to bring back through DNA. I remember all these things, every kind of creature that creeps on the ground, animals, birds, fish, and of course, I remember you. I want you to know that just as God said, time and again, it was good. It was very good. Beautiful, wonderful, awesome. You could see the Creator in all of it. It was amazing. And you were incredible too. God made you in the divine image. I was so happy on that day when the Lord said, I give all this to you human beings. It's all your responsibility. Go now and take care of the land, the sea, the sky, and all that's contained within it. Furthermore, he said to you, I'm not leaving you. My glory is in all creation. What can be known about me is here, and my spirit I breathe into you. Oh, human beings, what I miss most about you is the way you used to value trees more than fires. How you valued the purity of a raindrop that freely fell upon you, above and beyond the billions of gallons of oil you strive to take from below. I miss the way you cared and shared with any as they had need. My best memory of you is when you wandered in God's garden with nothing to be ashamed of. Sometimes I think about how it could have been. I know you lot say we shouldn't have regrets, but now looking back, now looking at the state of things, I cannot help but wonder how things might have been if you'd not been so greedy, so selfish, so self-destructive in your carelessness. To be honest, I'm so angry that you used me. You used me like an apple tree which stands in the garden freely offering its fruit. But you are not satisfied with its fruit, even though it contains all you need. No, you only took the fruit, but then you went on to take the branches and the trunk too for firewood. And now there is no fruit, there is no goodness. I'm angry that you destroyed everything in me that could keep you alive. When I think about you, I feel a deep sadness. I can hear God saying, they've broken my heart. What can I do? Dear human beings, you meant so much to me, and now it's all gone. Yours faithfully, the earth. Let us pray. O Lord, help us. We praise you as we see your glory in all your creation. We worship you for the wonder of birds and fish, animals of plants, of brambles and nettles, of orchids and all kinds of wildflowers. We praise you and we pray for our world, our leaders, our councils, our assembly. Lord, we pray that people will have their eyes opened to that responsibility and the pleasure that's found in it. We pray for ourselves. We pray for the inspiration that we've gained this morning from Claire and Rosie. We pray that we'll be able to take that and pass it on to others. Forgive us, Lord. Renew us, refresh us, revive us like winter to spring. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Shall we share the grace together? The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore.
Amen.
Thank you to you all for coming, and lovely to see you all, and hopefully see you next time. Send me an email.